Welcome, everyone, to the Power Up Podcast, a podcast dedicated to hanging out with people and getting to learn their stories and connecting through entertainment, whether that be video games, anime, comics, all that stuff. But today, super excited to have Mike Barron on. Hello, Mike. How's it going?
Hey, Greg, going good?
Nice. Awesome. Awesome. Had a little difficulty beginning, but we're here. Of course, when your hopes and dreams are set on something, of course it gets shattered because of technology and stuff. But I'm not complaining. So, but thank you for putting up with that, Mike. Um, so yeah, I just want to hop right in and get to know you. I'm even wearing a Punisher shirt because
All right.
Punisher is I'm not a big comic book reader. I feel like I kind of grew up reading more manga than anything, but I've always wanted to dive into the comic book area and um and the only one that I kind of got interested in is the Punisher, and I've only read the Punisher Maximum, but people were telling me, and of course I looked, that you did some excellent stories for the Punisher, and of course, so I'm gonna be looking into those as well. But were you always interested, like in comics, as like a kid?
Oh, yeah. Why?
Mm.
Because of Uncle Scrooge.
Uncle Scrooge?
Yeah, I picked an Uncle Scrooge up off a spinner rack in a drugstore
Okay.
in Mitchell, South Dakota, where I grew up. And I read it, and it was just fascinating. Karl Barks is one of the greatest masters of the comic book form ever. And
Mm-hmm.
anybody who wants to do comics, I would urge them to read Karl Barks' Uncle Scrooge and Donald Duck. There's never a wasted panel or a wasted word. His characterization is brilliant. His dialogue is brilliant. One of the greatest masters to ever work in the form.
Okay, so you said that was your first comic that you got into. So did you like branch out? Like, are you one where it's like, as long as the story's interesting, I'll check it out, or
No, no, no. In fact, when I got to college, some friends started showing me Neil Adams and Steranko.
okay?
Do you know who those guys are?
No, I'm a total noob
All right.
when it comes to this, but
Neil
I
Adams.
put my faith in you.
Neil Adams was one of the greatest masters of comic book art as well. He's probably most famous for the Green Lantern, Green Arrow he did for DC that Denny O'Neil wrote, because those were groundbreaking social justice issues. This was back in the 80s,
Hmm.
before social justice raised its ugly head. Denny O'Neil wrote them. He was my editor on many titles. Denny was also a writer, too. So his stories drew you in. They showed, they didn't tell. And probably the most famous one is the scene. The cover shows Speedy, Green Arrow's protege, shooting up heroin on the cover, and
Mm.
Green Lantern is standing in the background with Green Arrow, and he says, "Your ward is a junkie." And they did a whole bunch of stories like that, but they were entertaining, and they didn't ignite fury or demonize any portion of the comic book reading audience. Now Steranko, his art style revolutionized comics. When I saw his art, my head just exploded. I couldn't believe anybody would do such a thing. And I mean, brilliant. And if people who are familiar with Steranko know what I'm talking about, like his spreads for Nick Fury, Agent of Shield, or Captain America, just the most stunning thing you've ever seen in your life. In fact, Steranko is still with us, and I'm going to go down and visit him uh,
Ooh.
the first week in June, so I can give him a copy of Private American, which we're delivering right now. In fact, most of the subscribers have already gotten their copy of Private American. Private American is a graphic novel I wrote about the southern border, because I imagine what would the Punisher be doing today if I were writing him, and it seemed obvious
Hmm.
that he'd be on the southern border intercepting human traffickers, fentanyl smugglers, and terrorists that are pouring across our unguarded border. 10 or 20 years ago, this would not be a controversial subject.
Hmm.
But today it ignited fury on the left. On the Daily Kos, which is a far left hate site, ran an article on me saying Mike Barron releases another racist AF comic book.
I saw that.
And it was written by a woman who's never read anything I've written. Because she described my previous graphic novel, Thin Blue Line, which is about two police officers trying to survive a night of riots, as a story about white police officers flooding black neighborhoods to kill as many black people as possible. Those were her words. In fact, the two protagonists in the graphic novel don't kill anyone. We contacted the Daily Coast and said, "Have you read the book?" They said, "No. Would you like to read the book?" And they reluctantly said, "Well, if you want to show us, we'll take a look at it." So 2 months ago, we sent them a PDF of the complete book. And as of today, they haven't looked at it.
That's yeah, that's you mentioned before how like earlier that these sort of issues were never a controversy back then to what they were saying now. And I've talked to like Doug Tenaple and kind of got the video game side of the kind of his take on that stuff too. So when you were getting into the industry and whatnot, was this something that again it was just like, oh, these are just there's just a couple of like whatever, like stay away, like nothing big's gonna happen, and it kind of like creeped in sort of thing? Or was it
Oh,
like
yeah, it just exploded in the last couple of years. I
mm,
wrote The Punisher for 5 years, and my approach was that it was a straight crime comic. So for 3 years, there were no superheroes, monsters, spaceships, or science fiction. It was The Punisher versus organized crime, biker gangs that were dealing in drugs, arms smugglers, a Jim Jones type character. And then after 3 years, I got a new editor, and he was a gimmick guy. I can't say he was wrong because we sold a lot of books that way. And if you ever saw the covers, you'd understand what I mean by a gimmick guy. We had the plain brown wrapper cover, and there were a lot of photo covers. But he encouraged me to do more crossovers with superheroes. So there
mhm,
were a few. And before that, I'd done stories with the Kingpin, and there was a crossover with Daredevil. Uh,
mm,
but they were real grounded stories. There was nothing there to beg credulity. Uh, I have three tight rules about writing, and my rule number one is it's my job to entertain, and I never lose sight of that. I try to grab the reader by the throat on the first page and drag him into the narrative to the exclusion of all else. And by that, I mean complete suspension of disbelief. You're so absorbed in the story that when something interrupts, you resent it. Say, "Don't bother me. I want to see how this ends." That's how you tell a story. Number two is show, don't tell. That should be obvious, especially in a visual medium, but it's
mhm.
not. And that's why, even today, probably especially today, you'll pick up comics by the big two and you'll flip through them and you'll see a page completely covered with captions, completely covered with words, like one of those soulless Soviet housing blocks that they build. And it's off putting. When you look at a comic book page and they got 500 words down there, you think, I don't want to read this. Why doesn't he just write a book? Because and the rule about show don't tell is that any information you can use to advance the story that you can transmit to the viewer or the reader visually, you should. And save your words for when it counts. I don't
Mm,
believe in wordless comics. I think you get through them in 5 minutes and then you forget them. The words in comics are vital. They're very important, but you have to make them important. You can't just spit out cliches. And the proof is that today we're still repeating things Stan Lee wrote, like it's clobbering time, face front, true believers. But to give you an example of what we should not be reading are three of my favorite cliches. One is, I don't think we're in Kansas anymore. Number two is, we have to talk. And number three is, move it, people.
move it, people. Oh
Move it, people.
man.
I can't tell you how often that has been used in comics. I used it once myself. I was going through a comic I wrote a long time ago and I saw that. Oh
Oh
no.
no, you broke your own. Don't worry, I forgive you. Sort of. So when you said that when you got into comics, how you saw Uncle Scrooge and doing that, did you also kind of want to? take like the artist route as well and draw as well, or were you more captured into the writing? Or
No,
do you
no,
do
I tried to turn myself into an artist for years, and all I did was I got to a point where I could draw each page out by hand, and I'm just good enough that a reader and editor can look at it and understand instantly what I want. And my artists and my editors loved it for that reason. Archie Goodwin wrote the same way. So
Mm,
did Harvey uh, Kurtzman. That's how they wrote comics. They drew them out by hand and they gave them to the artist. And the artist says, "Oh, I get it. There's a night scene. These people are in this corner. I get it." And then they would rework it and add the magic that a good artist can add. I no longer write like that, but I did write like that for 20 years. Uh, and I would urge anybody who wants to do comics to try it, whether you can draw or not, because it teaches you so many valuable lessons. It teaches you how much weight a page can bear. Uh, and when you're drawing panel by panel, most importantly, it forces you to think what happens next, because that's the essential question in all fiction: what happens next? And the reader has to care before he's going to turn the page. Uh, so it means you got to really focus on that story to hold their interest, to excite them. Well, how do you make a reader care? There are an infinite number of ways, but let me just give you three. Number one, you create a fascinating character, Sherlock Holmes. There are more Sherlock Holmes stories now than there ever were during Conan Doyle's day, because that character is so fascinating. He lives on, and there have been so many versions of him in fiction, like the show House.
mm.
That was a rendition of Sherlock Holmes, and there was a medical show, I think it was called Watson, and that was about Sherlock Holmes too. And most recently, Benedict Cumberbatch did a series for BBC, which I thought was brilliant. The second way you can hold their interest is with a fascinating situation. Jurassic Park comes to mind because we all love dinosaurs, and who can resist a story about people intermingling with dinosaurs? And the third way to do it is with a seductive narrative voice. Now that's more difficult in comics than it is in straight prose, because you're limited by the amount of words you can use or should want to use, but you can still do it. And we can all think of writers whom we admire, like Alan Moore had a very seductive narrative voice, and so did Neil Gaiman, and they still do. I don't know if Alan's writing any more comics, but those are three ways that you interest the reader, that you hook the reader.
Is there kind of a difference between, I guess, comics and like a graphic novel, or is it kind of an intermix between the two? I'm just genuinely curious about it.
A graphic novel is a big, expensive comic book.
Oh, okay. Okay. I get you.
However, I'm now accustomed to writing nothing but graphic novels because we're crowdfunding
Hmm.
most of my books, and I don't want to offer a 24-page story.
Mm.
I want to offer big epic stories. This is the one that's just shipping.
Yes, Private
Yeah,
American,
yeah, and it's
and
66 pages of story.
and that should be in the description, I believe. I put in the description as much of your social media as possible.
Oh,
Got
that's
Bron.
Bronze Star. That's what we're launching that on June 3rd.
Oh,
But if
sorry.
well,
Did
that's
I?
all right. I wouldn't mind if you showed that either,
Oh yeah,
because
I
it's
was showing it. I'm sorry. I'm sorry
because
if I'm
it's the
doing it out of
video of
order.
this thing.
Well, this is a Bronze Star. I can play that for you guys.
The Civil War was
You
America's
hear it now?
bloodiest conflict. Over 500,000 died
Blow
to
it up.
national unity. When the war ended, Confederates like Harley Brogdon headed west, shooting game for the Army and gambling. When a card game turns deadly, Harley shoots in self-defense, killing the card sharp who threw down first. Wilfred Knorr, the card sharp's wealthy father, will stop at nothing to see Harley hang. Harley flees to Cobb's Gap, an old silver mining town at the foot of the Rockies. A remarkably peaceful town, especially after dark. But the sheriff harbors a dark secret, and no one dares go into the mines anymore. Cobb's Gap is full of secrets. People speak in hushed tones of something in the mine. Something worse than their cursed sheriff. Something even the Indians fear. Tired of running, Harley falls in love with a local widow with secrets of her own. But when Nora's posse arrives seeking vengeance, the stage is set for a showdown with unimaginable horrors from the deepest pits of hell, and every secret will be exposed. Eisner winner Mike Barron and acclaimed illustrator Pat Broderick present one of the weirdest westerns that Comic Dom has ever seen. Bronze Star, a thrilling tale of love, revenge, and supernatural terror from the minds of two legendary creators. It's not the monster you're looking for. Order your copy at bronzestarcomic.com.
Nice. Dude, that looks sick.
Well, we're very proud of it, and it's the best work of Pat's career. He thinks so. Everybody who's seen it thinks so.
Yeah, I love the moving animation. The artwork looks absolutely amazing, and I'm sure the story's gonna kick ass as well. So, dude, awesome! Congrats on that, man. That looks
Oh, thank
great.
you.
That looks great. When you so kind of going back to when you said you were a kid and you got into comics, and then you kind of decided to go on into college and stuff like that, is kind of getting into the industry the time that you got into. I'm sure it's changed nowadays. uh would you say, or not really, when it comes to like I guess what would the steps of that be like to try to submit yourself into getting into like the comic book, like the big comic book industry nowadays?
Well, I was in the right place at the right time. I had
Mm.
just met the illustrator Steve Rude, with whom I created Nexus. Uh, and I said, "What do you want to do, Steve?" He says, "Well, I want to do comics, but I can't write. What do you want to do?" So I I wrote the first 12 pages of Nexus by drawing them out by hand. Whole thing, gave 'em to dude. He penciled, inked, and lettered them, and then he showed them to the guys at Capital City Distribution, the world's second largest distributor of comics in the world at the time. And they said, "All right, let's go. Now we need 20 more pages." So I worked with those guys, and I created Badger about a year later with Jeff Butler. And those books got out there. And because those books attracted a lot of attention, Marvel called me out of the blue, Carl Potts, and said, "I want you to write Punisher." And he said he did that because he liked the Badger. And that's how I got in with Marvel. Now, my old editor at First Comics, Mike Gold, moved to DC, and he asked me to write The Flash, which is how I came to write The Flash. And I also wrote Dead Man. I wrote a couple of Batman stories, Hawk and Dove, a lot of other titles for DC. Uh, Dark Horse picked up the rights to Nexus and returned them to Steve Rude and I, an act of generosity that has
Oh,
never been replicated. And I'm still publishing with Dark Horse. In fact, we just did a graphic novel that came out a couple of months ago, and I'm working on another one. It's going to be next year before it comes out, but it's done. It's the art is by Kelsey Shannon. It's just mind blowing. I sent you a little bit of Kelsey's art uh, on the direct messaging
hmm.
on Twitter. And you say, "Well, why isn't Steve drawing it?" Well, Steve prefers to write his own Nexus adventures these days, and we remain good friends, and we just pursue the character in our own way.
Yeah, I got the artwork right here. Can we not? Oh, that's this artwork.
That's Pat Broderick. That's Bronze Star. The page
Oh,
from Nexus is super blue page.
super blue page.
Yeah,
Can
the
you?
art. You'll see it when just keep scrolling down. Keep going.
Oh,
There it is. That's it. Right
oh,
above
okay.
Private American and below Hogzilla. That's Florida Man. Just below it, the blue one. No, that's the cover of our next Florida Man graphic novel. No, that one.
This one.
No, above
Boom.
that one. That's it.
Oh man. Well, now people see my DMs, so that was funny. Just doxed myself, I guess. Uh, Wow. Yeah, that ooh, a floating head. Very cool.
Those are recurring characters. Kelsey's genius. I'm very happy to be working with him. There's a lot more that he's done. I wish I could show you, but that's just as an example. It's just a typical Kelsey Shannon page, and he did everything you see: pencils, inks, and colors.
Wow. Do you have like a specific art style that you really like that like or is it just like whatever you feel like fits what you're trying to the story
Well,
you're trying
yeah,
to
I
tell?
try to match the artist to the story. The Bronze Star came about when I asked Pat. I said, "Pat, what do you want to draw?" And he said, "Well, I would like to draw a supernatural western," and that's where Bronze Star came from.
Nice. Yeah, I love that big old werewolf that showed up. That's gonna be a a good one to get at. So, like I was saying, like well, actually, I want to get into Nexus a little bit too, because a friend of mine, Joe Ball, was telling me about Nexus. Could you kind of describe it a little bit for anybody new that might be interested into it? Because he said it was like kind of is like pretty unique in the way.
500 years in the future, Horatio Hellpop is a reluctant executioner of mass murderers. And there's this whole mythos behind him about how he came to be this person. And as we went along, we kept building the world and building the world until now he inhabits an immense, incredibly detailed world that encompasses the universe. Uh, it's a long story, but
Okay. No, no,
the
that's all right.
reason he is an executioner of mass murderers is because he was chosen by an insane alien to be the conscience of his race. When he sleeps, he suffers recurring nightmares of the most grotesque crimes against humanity. And when he wakes, he knows that he has to go after the bad guy in the dream, where the dreams will keep coming harder and harsher until they drive him mad. And that's how he knows who he's supposed to kill. Now he's a superhero because the same insane alien that cursed him with this funnels energy to him from the heart of a star, and it's similar to what Green Lantern does. It's only limited by his imagination. But if he's not in the presence of the right kind of star, he's just an ordinary human.
Very cool. Very cool. Yeah, I wanted to check everything out before I had a chance to reach out and like interview you, but you were like, "Yeah, let's go," and I was like, "Okay, let's go." But it sounds amazing. So when it comes to like creating like a character and whatnot, do you um like I guess what are your steps that you take to kind of create like or like put like I guess for lack of better terms, like I said, like create an interesting character or something like do you try to get into the mindset of like okay, what hasn't been done? What can be like a new spin on things like that? And I guess like do you have a process that you kind of go down to that helps you spark a new character creation?
I do have a process, but these days, for the most part, my stories choose me.
Hmm.
Every time I went online, there was a new Florida man story. And I'm sure most of your viewers are familiar with the Florida man trope, but uh, they're based on often grotesque news stories. And I'll give you an example. Florida man claims syringe found in rectum is not his. Now that's a fairly typical Florida man story, and I've read hundreds of them. And after a while, I said, well, I got to write about this guy, but I didn't want him to be just a, a loser who takes advantage of people or a criminal. So Gary Duba is a redneck living down by the swamp in a trailer. He's got a hair trigger temper. He likes to get high. He likes to get drunk. He's been in and out of trouble his whole life for minor shit, failure to pay child support, drunk and disorderly. But he's got a heart of gold, and he give you the shirt off his back. And that's, in a nutshell, what the Florida Man novels are all about. And there are three Florida Man novels now, and one graphic novel, and soon there's going to be another graphic novel. But the purpose of the Florida Man novels is to make you laugh out loud. And according to the reviews, I'm doing that. If you want to bust a gut reading a book, read Florida Man. Some of the reviews were saying I had Florida Man playing on my, my disc. I had the audio book, and I was laughing so hard I had to pull over. Another one says my wife kicked me out of bed because I was reading the book and I was laughing so hard she couldn't get to sleep.
So did you just just do tons and tons of research of finding like different Florida Man
Well,
stories?
yes and no. I mean, some of the stories inspire me, and I have incorporated them in the novels. One was police discover a couple living in a Walmart attic for 2 years, cooking meth. And I said, well, that's too perfect. So that's in the third Florida Man novel, Catfish Calling. But from the most part, I I just think, what is the most humiliating situation I can put Gary in? You asked about my process. When I get an idea for a story, I start making notes in a notepad. And they can be anything: story ideas, funny names, anything that pertains to it. And at a certain point, all those notes create what I call critical mass, where I can see the story. And from there, I go to an outline and I write a fairly detailed outline. And when the outline is done, I start to write the work. But the funny thing is that, yeah, I invariably veer away from the outline. And any writer will tell you this: if you create a real compelling character, at some point, he's going to turn around and tell you what he's going to do next. And that happens to me more times than I can
Mm.
tell.
Here's something that I've always felt like I've struggled with whenever it comes to like creating like a character or something. I'm curious to know, like, do you kind of like have a knack of like naming your characters? Because I always feel like I make the worst names out there, and I suck at it bad, and it's like I have to go to like one of those name generators because it's like I have no I like I can't think of anything. Are you? Would you say you're pretty good at like making awesome
I,
names?
I do make up some names and other names. Gary Duba was a childhood friend of mine in Mitchell, South Dakota, and I use his name. And I am Facebook friends with a guy named Vern Shank.
Nice.
Yeah, and I had to
Oh,
use that name. Uh, and then I was reading the liner notes for a band because I listen to a lot of music, and the liner notes were thanking all these people, and one of the people they thanked was named Evil Finkelstein. So I use that name,
Evil Finkenstein or Finkelstein.
Finkelstein, Evil Finkelstein. That's too perfect. I mean,
Yeah, that's like that is gold, and it's like so if you're like out and about, like, and you see like a really good name, is it's like I'm putting that down on the list, sort of thing.
yeah.
So, with like the comics and the writings that you've written over the years and whatnot, do you one thing that I really like about, for example, the Punisher is that I don't see him like even though a lot of people may categorize him as a superhero, I don't really or even more an anti-hero. I
He's
don't
not a superhero by any stretch of the imagination. He's an ordinary guy. Hang on, I got to open my window.
Oh yeah, sure.
I'm still talking.
It's all good.
Get a
Don't
breeze
want you
going in here.
don't want you to suffocate if you're
No.
getting hot or
Well, as
something.
I said, I approach it as a straight crime comic, and that's how I think the Punisher should be.
Mhm.
So when I see Punisher meets Archie, or Punisher kills the Marvel Universe, uh, they just slide right on by me. I'm not interested.
Mm. Okay, very cool, very cool. Yeah, because I was saying, like with the Punisher, that's what I like about him the most is that he's not a superhero. I mean, you can categorize him as like an anti-hero, I guess you could say.
Oh yeah, of course you can.
But that's but it's like it's almost like his humanity, you could say, is his superpower because he has I would say he has very strong pain tolerance. He can, just take a beating and just kind of shake it off and whatnot. And I read that you the one that introduced micro chip
Yes,
into that. Uh, what it inspired you to create a microchip?
uh, Punisher could not do it all alone. He had to have tech support. Nobody is that lethal and widespread unless he's got somebody back at the base, like a dispatcher, saying, "You got to go to this address," or "I got just the gun for you." And so Microchip was born.
Mm,
I'm sure that most of your viewers are aware that the Punisher was based on Don Pendleton's Executioner. And when he first appeared, he was just a cheap ripoff of the Executioner. And it wasn't until Stephen Grant and then I got hold of him that he became a fully fleshed character. And
yeah.
and as I said, Private American
Hmm.
is the Punisher.
Yeah, absolutely.
And if you want to get that book, you go to theprivateamerican.com. We're selling the books there.
Yes, I believe that is in the descriptions. So check it out for sure. But yeah, because that's kind of where I heard about you, Mike, is that that terrible reimagining of the Punisher with the symbols being changed, him not using firearms anymore and katanas and all this stuff. And that's when I heard you like speak out about it and stuff like that. And it's just, where is this insanity coming from to where you just take something that's founded? Because interesting of what you said he was a cheap, kind of a cheap rip off of the Executioner, and then you guys got a hold of him and really fleshed him out and stuff like that. So it sounded like you were like really the origin of the Punisher and how he involves. Because I guess this can lead to another question. If when it comes to writing a series with an already established character, does each artist, or excuse me, well, I guess each artist and writer try to kind of put their stamp on the character while also honoring
I
who
don't
wrote it?
think about that. I'm not
Never
trying
think
to put
about
my
that. Okay.
stamp on the character. I'm trying to tell an exciting story. Now, most readers know that Jerry Conway created the Punisher.
Okay.
Some people think I did. That's a big mistake. I did not. I think I sent you that headline from the Daily Kos. It's in your feed on
Hmm.
uh, on what do we talk about on
Twitter.
Twitter? Yeah. Did I send that to you? No, I didn't.
I don't think so. I don't get anything. I don't
Well,
have
let
that
me
on my.
show you. Let
Yeah.
me show you. There it is. All right. It's at the bottom of our messaging
Yeah,
on
sure.
Twitter. Do you see it?
Yep, I see it. I will pull that sucker up. Uh, just so I don't share my my DMs again. Punisher creator
There it
Mike
is.
Barron releases another racist AF comic book. Mike, what are you doing, Mike? No.
Well, I didn't create the Punisher. Jerry Conway did. But the person who wrote this, Star Minion, who's never read anything I have written, uh,
Mm-hmm.
and I've never heard of her before, attacked out of the blue. Uh, I wouldn't want to characterize her, but I think it's safe to say that she's a social justice warrior that's upset about everything except those who believe exactly as she does. I didn't ask her to attack me. She attacked me gratuitously. But she did us a big favor because of the publicity that this generated. We were able to raise our crowdfunding numbers significantly.
That's what I don't. That's honestly what I don't get is whenever they do this sort of stuff, it like, you're just like, oh, this is going to be good because everyone's gonna now see this, and now we can be like, hey, go check it out over here, sort of thing. But
Right.
yeah, like, yeah, I'm sorry that you had to deal with that because I had a
But
friend.
don't be. It's all for the best.
Yeah, yeah, and these people don't even know. They don't even know what they want to, because you would assume that part of a comic book is to get lost, like what you said. You want to tell an interesting story that people
That's right.
can be sucked in and experience that universe and that story. So why would you want to put in stuff that like takes it away from you? Or why would you want to just make it like real life, in the sense of like in
Well,
the sense of like it's when I hear with like the whole like Dungeons and Dragons things where it's like we got to change this because this is racism. Like I I'm not seeing characters that represent me, and it's like, well, I would be the exact opposite of myself if I'm in a universe, you know.
Right. Well, we're dealing with meritocracy here. That the person who does the job the best should get the job, and it has nothing to do with his, her, or its racial identity or sexual orientation. It has to do with the work itself, and that's what the United States used to be all about. But now we are in decay, like the Roman Empire,
Mhm.
because of the vast wealth we generated by elevating the individual to the greatest status in any nation state, as he, she, or it should be. We've created luxury and wealth, the luxury for people with mental problems to look for new frontiers in imaginary oppression. And that's where all this stuff is coming from. They don't have to work for a living, they have too much time on their hands, and they want everyone else to admire them for their lofty morals. And so they're looking for a new cause that they can say, I did that. I created uh, uh, the thrust behind the Quagle movement. You know, the I am behind the Quagle movement. Admire me. I'm the first person to elevate the Quagle above all other races, sexual orientations, and religions.
Yeah, and then you said like you said so earlier that like what did you say back in like the 70s, like you kind of like comics tackled this like kind of some social issues and stuff like that. So
Denny O'Neill.
you would think that these people wouldn't complain about it because hasn't it already been like talked about? You
These
know.
people who are doing these comics today that make no sense are
Hmm.
completely unaware that Neil Adams or Denny O'Neill ever existed. They have never looked at a comic that's older than the one they picked up at the comic shop yesterday. They have no idea of the history of comics. Not that the history of comics is that great, but it's worth
Hmm.
studying if you're going to work in the field.
Yeah, so you went out and you well, actually, what college did you attend to kind of like get um into like is there specific colleges that deal specifically like with the comic book era or not really?
Oh, they do these days. But when I attended the
Hmm.
University of Wisconsin, I majored in political science, and a fat lot of good it's done me. But I did take some writing courses with excellent teachers. One of whom was Jerry McNeely, and Professor McNeely said, "You make them laugh a little bit, you make them cry a little bit, you scare the hell out of them, and that's entertainment."
So when it comes to writing, do you prefer to like writing for a superhero or like the average man that's put into a certain situation and then
I prefer realistic stories. The only superhero I write is Nexus,
Mm.
and that's the one I created. And because I created it, it's got enough complexity that I can find more and more stories to tell in that universe. Uh, but it's far from your standard superhero fare. Everybody thinks they can do a comic. Everybody wants to do a comic. Comics are the most forgiving medium on earth. You can get away with stuff in comics that you couldn't in any other medium. And Superman is the proof of that when he appeared in 1939. It took a half century for special effects in film to catch up so that they could do him realistically in a movie. Uh, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, Flaming Carrot. Uh,
That's that's a new one to me, the flaming carrot?
Yeah,
Or
that
f
was a comic that was quite popular at one time, and these are just some of the ideas that people have peddled into long-lasting series like Cerebus the Aardvark by Dave Sim. Because Dave's a very interesting writer. I mean, you pick up those Cerebus comics and they grab you because the writing is intelligent and he's telling a story.
so obviously you kind of gave your thoughts about what's happening, in the industry now. Do you feel like there's any hope for for the future, to kind of remove the weeds that are infesting it in a way, or do you think kind of like what you're doing now, like the crowdfunding and the Indiegogo sort of thing is kind of the new way for people to be able to share their creations without having to worry about weirdos coming up and we gotta do it right. Or,
Well, yeah, crowdfunding has been a seminal event in my life. It certainly revitalized my career to a certain extent. And a group of us who are called Comicsgate Kings, who used to be mainstays in the comic industry, Chuck Dixon, Graham Nolan, those two guys created Bane, the superhero in the Batman movie.
mm,
Um, Ethan Van Sciver, he used to draw Green Lantern, and Art T. Bear, Aaron Lopresti, Billy Tucci. Billy Tucci is famous for She and also for doing Our Army at War comics. Uh, and we are all doing very well in crowdfunding for a couple of reasons. One reason is those guys are all artists. I'm the only writer in the Comicsgate Kings, but those artists are phenomenal. If you look at a page by Ethan Van Sciver or
yeah,
Aaron Lopresti, you look at their stuff and you say, "Wow!" And comics are a visual medium. I used to pick up a comic and I'd flip through and like the early Conan the Barbarian that was written by Roy Thomas and illustrated by Barry Smith. I saw Barry Smith's art. I couldn't believe it. I had to have everything he ever drew. Uh, and those were pretty good stories because they were adapted from Robert E. Howard. But on the other hand, there were comics that were brilliantly illustrated, but the stories were inevitably disappointing because the stories couldn't match the art.
so I noticed that you've won some awards like the Inkpot Award, the Eisner Awards. How did it feel to like, are those kind of like big awards in that field, uh to get like your really high honor awards? And that must have been
Yeah,
like
I was honored to receive those. It's deeply gratifying. It's nice to know that our work
mhm,
was appreciated. But since then, the comic industry has split right down the middle,
mm,
just as the country has. You got the woke on one side, and they've taken over the main publishers. And there's
mhm,
been talk for years that Marvel and DC are going to stop publishing books altogether. They may farm the titles out to smaller publishers. Marvel has already checked those waters by giving GI Joe to IDW. Uh, but when you look a lot of those books, they really don't seem to be story oriented. They seem to be cause oriented. And I don't want
yeah,
to finger any particular title, but you know what they are out there. And on the other hand, there are a lot of great IDW or excuse me, image titles that were story oriented, uh, like 100 Bullets by Brian Azzarello. Uh, there's a book called Stray Bullets by David Lapham, which is gripping. It's grim stuff, but every line in that rings true. I'm at a place in my life where I have to believe a story could happen before I can enter into it fully. And that doesn't rule out science fiction or superheroes, because I love the Alien movie and Aliens. I believe those movies
mhm,
completely because they take themselves seriously. And the people that made them have thought it through down to the last bolt on the spaceship. But other movies, you know, if they start joking around and and play it for laughs, and you know, a lot of Marvel movies have been doing this recently. It may
mhm.
be entertaining, but that's not what I'm looking for.
Do you think, speaking of the Marvel movies, do you feel like the earlier Marvel movies before this chaos really happened, do you think that they're superiorly better, or at
I
least
do, I
getting
do,
in the
and I think that the Winter Soldier is probably the best of all the Marvel movies. It's a very serious movie with a serious theme. And it just happens to be about Captain America and Bucky.
yeah. Because I remember seeing, Iron Man in theaters, like, that
Yeah,
was
it's
the
another very serious movie, very
that
well
yeah,
done.
and I agree with what you're saying too, like, everything is just now it's all about trying to get laughs in there or, like, the cause of the matter. I agree 100% like what you said. So with with the comics gate, I've gotten to hear some people's comics, gate, like, origin and how they got into it or how it affected them. And did you say you said you were like, are you one of the comic skate kings sort of thing? So like when did that like sort of realization kind of flooded upon you or like happened out of the
Well,
sudden where you're just like,
a
whoa,
couple
what the
years
heck's going
ago,
what's going
uh,
on?
well, Ethan Van Sciver is head of the Comic Skate Kings. He's uh, he's the ringleader, the talk show host. We have a show every Monday night on his channel. I think it's called All Caps. With Ethan, Graham Nolan, Aaron Lopresti, Billy Tucci,
Hmm,
R.T. Bear, Shane Davis, a bunch of guys that were giants in the regular industry but quit for various reasons to do their own books. Now, beyond that, anybody can call themselves comic skate, and a lot of people have, hoping to catch a tailwind or hang on to the shirt tails or something. And there have been people associated with comic skate who have behaved badly, but those are not the comic skate kings, and we can't stop anybody from calling themselves comic skate if they want.
hmm. So were you still in the industry then when like did all of a sudden it was like whoever
No,
like comes up to you and okay, so you
no, I fell out of the industry in the late 90s. I couldn't find any work whatsoever. I worked as a janitor for a while. And
mm,
it wasn't until I moved to Colorado from Wisconsin, it took me years to get back on my own footing. Uh, I had been trying to write novels for 30 years and they were all trash, and I knew they were trash. But after this 10-year hiatus, I returned to novels and I was writing one, and I was on fire, and I realized that I knew what I was doing, as whereas before I didn't know what I was doing. The first time in my life I understood story. If you understand story, you don't make missteps. You don't give it to your best friend, say, "Read this. Is it any good? Is it any good?" No, you know it's good when you send it out, and I think any pro writer will tell you the same thing. And these aren't the guys who are looking for beta readers to tell them that their stuff is okay. They know their stuff is okay because they're masters of the form and they know what they're doing.
well, I guess there's some advice for the upcoming writers out there. Just know that your stuff is good when you submit that.
Well, there's a lot more to it than that, but there's really
Mhm,
those people who want to write novels. There's only one essential book.
mhm,
It's called Elements of Style by Strunk and White. It takes 1 hour to read. It's great. Now, there are hundreds of great books on writing out there, and I have a bunch of them. I have Stephen King's On Writing, and that's a very good book. John Brain was a famous British novelist. His most famous novel was Room at the Top. He wrote a book called Writing Your Novel, and in it he says nobody should try and write a novel before they're 40 years old, because they simply don't have enough life experience to inhabit all the points of view that a novel requires. Now, there are exceptions to this, like William Styron, who wrote As I Lay Dying, I think when he was 26, and Carson McCullers, who wrote The Hardest Lonely Hunter when she was 24. There are exceptions to all these rules. But for the most part, Brain was right on that you need to acquire enough life experience uh, and empathy and ability to inhabit different points of view before you can write a compelling novel. And that's not always the case. You know, the reason I'm writing novels is because of John D. MacDonald and his series character Travis McGee, which just enthralled me. And I'm not alone. I can't tell you how many successful professional writers began writing because of John D. MacDonald. But the thing about the Travis McGee novels is they're all told in the first person. As soon as
mm,
I went down to the dock, I unlocked the busted flush. So everything you learn about the story is filtered through the perceptions of and intelligence of one person. And there are many ways to do this. I like a close personal point of view myself, but I will jump from person to person in the course of a novel. It's always done in separate chapters. You don't mix two points of view in one chapter.
hmm.
Whoever wants something the most owns the point of view in that chapter. And then there's the omniscient point of view, which some of my friends use, and that means they'll describe the thoughts and feelings of a half dozen people in the space of one chapter, but they can do it because they know how to step uh, and to maintain that narrative so that the reader doesn't get lost.
So outside of like comics and whatnot, do you have like a favorite author that you enjoy
Oh, I have
reading?
so many, but I mentioned John D. MacDonald. Uh, when I was young and reading every science fiction novel I could, I fell in love with Philip Jose Farmer. I recommend. I like Stephen Hunter very much. He's very much with us, and he writes the Sniper series. I
Ooh,
like Jack Carr. Jack Carr burst on the scene with the Terminal List. Jack Carr's a ex Special Forces, and when you start reading that book, the authenticity smacks you in the face. This guy was there. I mean, he describes a rifle and what you have to do and how you have to shoot, or the intricacies of planning a house by house search in Afghanistan. He's been there, so he gets that all right. But you don't have to be there if you are a good enough writer and you can imagine every point of view, because it's the writer's job to imagine every point of view. And people say, well, you can't write a novel from a black point of view. Well, tell that to William Styron, who wrote the Confessions of Nat Turner. It always comes down to this: should Shakespeare have been allowed to write Othello? What an absurd question. And yet there are the people ask that question every day, trying to set up barriers and fences about who can write what. And if you're a
yeah.
good writer, you write anything you want. That's your gift, to imagine any point of view. If you're a bad writer, people aren't going to buy your stuff, so I wouldn't worry about it.
Very true. Very true. You might have answered it like maybe earlier on. Like, did you said you've had a couple of rules that you like to follow from being in the from being in like the industry and reading other people's and stuff. Do you kind of see like a certain, not like the golden rules, but certain rules like in other people's work that you kind of see like a lot of people doing kind of the same thing, or is that's what's the beauty about it is every
No, no, I know if they're a good writer. That's all that matters. My rules are unique to me. One, entertain. Two, show don't tell. Three, be original. That third part means we're all unique human beings, and we necessarily bring our experiences and attitudes to whatever it is that we write. But that should not negate the writer's ability to jump from point of view to point of view.
Gotcha, gotcha. Could you explain a little bit about the character Badger and kind of where that stemmed from?
So we're Nexus was going along, and I said, guys, let's get another title. And there was this artist named Jeff Butler. I'd seen his art on a poster down on campus. I called him. I said, Jeff, you want to do comics? Sure. What do you want to draw? He says, I want to draw druids. So I wrote this 10-page story about Ham the Weather Wizard, who was so cantankerous that the other druids in 6th century Wales took up a collection and hired the Vikings to put him in a coma, sail west, and drop him off the edge of the earth. Of course, they didn't come to the edge of the earth; they came to the New World. So Jeff drew it all out, and we went in to see the guys at Capitol, and we laid those pages out, and Milt said, nah, nobody wants to read about druids. Give us a costume crime fighter. And my first thought was, why would anybody put on a costume and fight crime? They'd have to be insane. And I was reading The Minds of Billy Milligan at the time by Daniel Flowers, and it was one of the first serious studies of multiple personality disorder. And I was walking down State Street with Badger Liquors, Badger Pub, Badger posters. So he became the Badger. And so I said, Jeff, uh, they don't want to feature the Druid. He said, well, I'm not going to waste these pages. So I said, fine. So I wrote the Badger beginning on page 11 when he meets Ham, because they're both in the same insane asylum in adjoining rooms. And that's how Ham met the Badger.
Wow. A very interesting story indeed, man. Just we all that and just we don't want to we don't want druids. We just- well, we're coming up on an hour here, and I meant to ask you, Mike, if you have to head out. I don't want to keep you if you need
Yeah,
to.
I'm only good for an hour.
Always good for an hour. Okay.
Yeah.
Is there anything that you would like to plug in before we sign off?
If you want Thin Blue Line, those are available. You go to thinbluelinecomics.com. Private American, theprivateamerican.com. Bronze Star, what did we say there? I think it's bronzestarcomic.com, but I'm not sure. But we're going to be up uh, on Kickstarter on the first week of June, so you'll be able to find it there. Uh, I'm on Twitter at Bloody Red Baron. I'm on.
Love the name.
Oh, thank you. What is that? Oh, wait. I know what it was. I know what I'm looking for. Here we go. Linktree, Mike Barron. That leads you to every place I'm on.
Yep, I have that in the description.
All right, yeah, just go to Linktree and you'll be able to find me. And if you go to Amazon, you type in Mike Barron, you'll get 22
Mhm.
pages of stuff.
All righty. Well, yeah, Mike Barron, thank you very much for talking with me, for coming on the show and putting up with my having to switch over to a whole other platform at the last
Well, your
minute.
your technical expertise is greater than mine, Greg.
Well, I appreciate your patience for it. But yeah, all of Mike Barron's social media is in the description below. Go out, support his projects. They look amazing. And of course, anyone who writes The Punisher is a big winner in my book. I love The Punisher. And it's a shame of what they're trying to make him into now, which is the complete opposite and looks like hot garbage. So, thank you very much, Mike. Thanks to
Thanks,
everyone
Greg.
who stopped by. You guys have a good rest of your night. Take care.